Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Well, on November 11th, look, we still have a whole bunch of folks who want to come to a book club. So I say thank you. I'm very humbled that you would still want to spend your time doing these books with me and talking about them with our, like, it's like our book club family. We should have a better name other than book club family. But you know what? I'll go through the Code Talker translation and find the right one. Hey, oh, I'm so excited to talk about this book. So for folks who may not remember, we're talking about Code Talker, the first and only memoir of one of the original Navajo code talkers of World War II. I did reach out to the author and she declined joining us. So, which I found pretty funny because it's like, she didn't even offer, her son or his son or anything, right? Like just nope. Okay, cool beans. But regardless, I was really stoked to find out that the library had this book as well. So a few of our somebody came up to me, I can't remember who, and said, yeah, this is at the library. And I'm like, that's great, because I didn't expect it to have it. And then when I started reading through it, oh my God, there's so much I want to talk about and say. So I guess the first thing I'll say is this. I did a little bit of a dive into the Canadian pre-code talkers as well. And I actually stumbled upon, it's just a 14-minute documentary of that Cowboy Smith actually made. So I don't know if you all want to see that, but if we have enough time at the end, then I'll play it and we can watch it together. I'll give you all the link if you have a headache or whichever want to move on. But this book from a Navajo perspective. So again, I'm Satu Dene, and as a Dene, I was so honored to read this, and I totally forgot to do the land acknowledgement, so I better start there. Oki Naganago, Neko Che Chistakomaki, Dekots Nago Tene Siku. Welcome everybody to the book club, and I will acknowledge that we're on Blackfoot territory. This land has been taken care of by the Siksika, Kainai, Bagani, South Bagani, now called the Blackfeet Nation in the States. And they've looked after this territory since time immemorial. In 1877, the Treaty 7 was signed that brought in the Stoney Nakoda, the Dene from Tsuut'ina. And I always acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status and non-status as the caretakers of this land. And I think it's always important to, give honor to the peoples whose lands was stolen, who are not properly acknowledged, who aren't being given any form of governance to be actual treaty partners. And I acknowledge that we're all treaty partners, but the truth is that Canada, Crown, Britain, and all of its people that came from not here have broken that treaty since 1877, and really should be doing a lot better to repair that relationship. I actually also want to acknowledge that last week, Maurice Sinclair passed away. Really important to acknowledge him as we would any other major head of country, state. But I was really disappointed, and I haven't done a TikTok or podcast about it, but I was really offended by the amount of settlers that didn't know who he was, didn't know his contributions, and said condolences to me like my dog, like, oh, I'm really sorry you lost a member of your family, as if this wasn't a major head of state that we all lost that contributed so much to this country. So, and the racism in the comments for so-called 50% of Calgarians so-called committed to anti-racism, zero of them were challenging the racist, horrible comments in all of his obituaries, news articles about him. Settlers are perfectly okay with those horrible things being said about him. So just to kind of put into context the racism in 2024 in Canada, it's still right there. And so I acknowledge that the non-Indigenous that are here tonight, like they are obviously people committed to caring about being better treaty partners. So I thank you all for being here, and I think there's only one other Indigenous person than myself. Like I'm just grateful to discuss Native books with Native people too. So yeah, I should probably start there and ground this book club and start in that good way. So we'll just quickly go around and do a quick check-in with everyone, and then we'll start talking about the book. And Kathy, I invite you to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm not feeling so great right now. I think my sinuses or my many hairs is starting to act up, but I'm hearing echoes in my ears when you speak, and I'm feeling really dizzy. So I might check out early. I'm also trying to cook myself supper here too. So yeah, but good to be here.
I'm sorry to hear that, Kathy, but I appreciate you sharing. And of course, we understand if you're doing that, and maybe we'll check in with you a little later and just see how you're doing. So, Carol, I invite you to unmute yourself and yeah, say a few words
Hi,
before we get started.
hi, Michelle. It's been a while, so I'm glad to see everyone. I've missed the book club. I've been very sick, and I'm happy to participate in this book club. And then I'll be out of the loop again for surgery. But I'm glad that I got this book. I had to drive. I couldn't find it, and I had to drive. I went to Canmore and got it. So I'm halfway through it, and it's a fascinating book. I was really pleased to be able to read it and to really understand and honor the work that Chester did and many men like him. And I think this year there was a few more things in the media about this, but prior to that, there hasn't been any acknowledgement of the critical role that the Indigenous people played in the war. So on November 11th, I'm happy to read this. So thanks.
Thank you, Carol. It probably is a good time to acknowledge that November 8th is Indigenous Veterans Day for that reason, because of and as well as it was said in here, how many benefits were withheld from the Indigenous as well in the state. So, Kat, oh wait, so yeah, Kat is next. If you'd like to
Thank
unmute
you.
yourself. Yeah.
I really like this book as well. I wasn't expecting to, because of all the war stuff. But it's a wonderful story. And I was honored to read it for November 11th because, as everyone may or may not know, Indigenous veterans were not treated very well after they came back home from the war. And it always inspires me that so many Indigenous people did sign up and volunteer to be part of the war effort, given the terribly horrible way they were treated. And they still chose to fight for these countries that are colonial and awful to them. So that speaks to Indigenous character and how wonderful it is. And I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Kat. Oh, sure. That sounds great. Rosemary, would you like to just tell us how you're doing?
Thank you. I'm halfway through the book, and like the others, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm learning so much that's new, and it's very interesting also to learn more about the Navajo language and the complexity of that language. and how it was used in the situation. And I'm very much appreciating learning about Chester's childhood and just the setting for his childhood is so different from anything I'm used to. Um, yeah, so, and like everyone else, it is important to remember and the contribution of Indigenous veterans, and as everyone has said, what their treatment has been like, which is so typical of this country and its history. And tomorrow night, and thank you, Michelle, for promoting this. Um, Adrian Wolfleg is going to do a presentation on the calling home ceremony, which he participated in to honor and to call home um, the ancestors, right, who fought in the wars overseas and to bring them home. So, yeah, it's a very special time. Thank you.
I'm just going to add to what Rosemary said. If you have not seen Adrian Wolf's like presentation of Calling Home the Spirits, it's really important. So I don't love well actually I'm just going to mute this or pause this for 1 second. Unmute.
Thanks, Michelle. Good to see everybody. And yeah, having read this book and then have this discussion on Remembrance Day, November 11th is really important. So thank you for being here. I think what I appreciated a lot about getting to read this was it's really brought a whole story. So it really brought a whole person into experiences that I knew very little about. So wouldn't normally have taken the time to read the details of life on front lines. And that left me with just a lot to think about today. And so just really grateful for that. And really looking forward to the discussion because it also got me thinking a lot about the role of language. And just really appreciated understanding more of the complexities of Navajo language and the way that it got discussed in this book, and how connected it was to each person and the experiences in the book. So just made me feel very much more connected to what Remembrance Day is about to have read this. So thanks for today. And yeah, I'm hoping my family is doing okay. We had a long weekend, so it means supper didn't get on the table right on time. So I'm hoping everyone is completing everything. I'm just trying to just calmly sit in this conversation and glad all of you had a few minutes tonight to be here.
So grateful, especially on a holiday to have so many folks wanting to do this. So I don't think I missed anyone. I'm just going to do a quick double check here. I think everybody spoke. So now I can get into it. Okay. Okay. So excited to talk about this book. So this was a Christmas gift actually given to me a few years ago from my dad that I just kept putting off from reading because of I just think when COVID happened, like I actually couldn't even read a book fully for a while and it just took a while. So anyway, I was really glad we finally got to go through this book. And so for those of you who don't know, my other husband, his name is Adam Beach and he lives in Hollywood and is happily married, but it's just because I'm happily married here and he's happily married there for now. But I have been an Adam Beach fan forever, so I had seen Wind Talkers a long time ago when that movie came out, and just really. I loved Nicolas Cage at that time. I think The Rock was big. It was just that time. So anyway, loved that movie at that time. But the more I kept reading this, the more angry I kind of got about it, as they didn't they didn't depict it right at all, and they made it look like Adam Beach was a poor little Indian that needed saving, and thanks to the big Nicolas Cage, he was. And so, and especially after reading this book, like it's so insulting that that movie was even made. And I know in the pictures they showed a picture of him on set talking to one of the other actors who was a part of that. And so I'm just going to say this, just to remind people, 2001, 2002, Natives, we weren't respected. And I remember around, I guess it was about, I don't know, 2009, 2010, like I would remember Adam Beach putting out tweets about how horribly some of these sets were, scripts, how Indigenous people had no voices at these places, and there was no like filmmaking kind of stuff. If someone was lucky enough to get a Canadian grant to do something, it was still really stifled, right? And I would argue it has been that way even until maybe more recently. But then Adam Sandler put out a really horrible, horrible movie around the pandemic. I remember all the natives like said we're leaving this because this is so horrible, and it was on Netflix for like a week or something, and only racists liked it, and then they finally took it down. And I never watched it, and I didn't watch it on purpose because I knew how racist it was. So like just to give an idea how hard it is to actually depict natives in film. I wanted to say that just to honor the work that Adam Beach tried to do, as well as the other natives at all associated with that movie. Um, because like I just don't believe at that time people had a voice to really correct the record a lot. So understandably, it was really horrible now in retrospect how it was depicted. So I just wanted to put that out there because now that natives are making our own films and doing it through an indigenous lens, my hope is one day the right person, like Adrian Stimson, for folks who may not know who he is, he's a local Blackfoot, well respected Blackfoot. He's a veteran as well. He was a reporter in Afghanistan. He's an artist, and multimedia artist as well. So like he'll do plays, he'll do film, he'll do reporting. Like he's a really talented man. Another person underutilized and such, but he did get most recently the artist picked to do the war memorial grant or war memorial in Ottawa. So really excited for him for that, but like well respected man. Um, anyway, a person like him, who has combat under his belt, who, is obviously native, if he were to do a film like that, like just imagine how great it could be to actually see our people through an Indigenous lens. So, and I mean, we have so many other amazing film artists, including Cowboy Smith doing this great one about the Cree code talkers. So hopefully we'll get to it. But one of the things I got so excited about in this book that I stopped literally my brother, I stopped my husband, I stopped my daughter and her little friend. It was her birthday just to read this because I think on page 109, the Unbreakable Code, when they were stuck in the room and trying to make the code, this was so great from an Indigenous lens, how they put it together. So I'm just going to read it. Of course, after we compiled a comprehensive list of military terms, there was still a problem. In Navajo, no equivalent for words like fighter plane existed, so we chose animals and other items from our everyday world to resemble the military equipment. So fighter plane was represented by the quick and maneuverable hummingbird. A huge transport plane was represented as an eagle who carried prey. Battleship was a whale. A destroyer was a shark. A cruiser was a small whale. And in choosing each word, we decided how the animal chosen lived and hunted. And we did our best to link up the logical with the piece of military equipment. Sometimes we used non-animal items to represent certain things. A hand grenade was a potato. Bombs were eggs. Japan was slant eye. There was no Navajo equivalent for months of the year. So instead, we used concepts to describe each month. Like January was crusted snow, a book we had already kind of talked about. And he goes through it. And then, for the US of A, that translates to our mother. And I really loved how they put that together, and then in the back, there's an extensive list of what words that they had chosen. So that was one of my favorite parts. And then to kind of go through this in the back, and like just to try to see some of the things that they translated it to, I thought was awesome. So, I really love that part of the Indigenous lens. And then if we have time to watch the 14 minutes from Cowboy Smith there, basically the Cree did the same thing. And both were doing it at the same time. So in 1942, the Cree were doing it in Europe. And in 1942, the Navajo was doing it in the Pacific. So that was like, as you all know, sometimes we get pan-indigenized. So here we had two separate nations and two separate languages being done at the same time. And then one of my favorite parts in the book was when the army didn't see the value to this, so they didn't want to do it, and then they had to borrow a few code talkers just to advance in that one area. And so I really appreciated that. But then he almost died because they thought he was Japanese and had stolen a Marine uniform. So like it was really I found it to be very exhausting reading this in the way that you felt hungry for them. You felt bad for his like foot injuries. I felt bad for them at one point in time. They had to like pee in the little holes they were in, and they were naked. And I was just like, oh my God, like it's just hell. And I think I was mad a lot during the entire book because I was a Sea Cadet, and I remember how much leave means. And knowing they weren't allowed leave, basically. They were forced to go through it over and over and over and while their like counterparts would go and have leave in Australia for a couple of weeks. So like I was so angry and offended for them, and angry too that they had to keep it quiet for so long. And they did. They wouldn't even tell their dad, you know, like they kept their secret. And so I have so much respect for all of them, and so little respect for the non-indigenous, for not doing more, saying more, acknowledging basically the Cree and the Navajo won the war for the Allied forces. Like it's so insulting. I can't even tell you how angry and livid I feel about some of that. And it's not until like they're all dead that some of it gets acknowledged. And of course, the barriers that they were facing at the time because they were native. So a lot of them never did get jobs again. It's incredibly irritating to me, some of those things that were being said. Um, so yeah, I was dog earing all of these things, but the more and more I got to the end, the more and more I just felt like I was dog earing every page. So, I just really appreciated that they were who they were regardless, and they laughed when they laughed regardless. And I remember one point in the book where one of the Marines was like, English, please. And they all kind of started laughing because the Marine sounded like the sister at the boarding school to them anyway. And so there were so many wonderful things that I loved about it, and they were so honest about it. And I was sad towards the end when I had read um, that somewhere in North America, that I think they said it was Alaska, there was a Navajo that was hearing Navajo over the radio. It's like, that's Navajo. And so then the Japanese did find some Navajo and start torturing them to see if they could find out and break that code, and they never could. But that just means like an innocent comment, like, hey, I can hear Navajo, but I can't really understand what they're saying, was taken into like that some folks in this world were tortured over that. Despite the very people that they're fighting alongside that did so much damage to our languages to try to strip it. And honestly, it was the Cree and the Navajo that helped win the wars on both sides, on both continent. So, yeah, so there's a lot of like anger, even though I know they don't feel that way. I have never met an ex-military person that's not so like, ah, it was our job, and are just like humble, just so humble about it. And I'm like, well, as the next generation, let me be mad for you. That's how I felt throughout this entire thing, and proud. Oh my God, so proud. And researching what the Cree were doing in Europe, like very proud of them too, even though I'm not Cree. And I mean the Navajo are distant cousins of ours, right? There's DNA from the top of North America down into South America. So, oh, and they had South Our Mother for South America in the back. I was reading through. So, yeah, really loving that. Yeah, so with that, I know you're kind of making supper and stuff, Kathy, but if and when you're ever ready to chime in, don't hesitate.
Oh, yep. Well, you covered most everything I found interesting. The leave and the fact that they had to go through even more than the regular Marine in that it broke so many of their protocols, like touching, being around dead bodies and all that stuff. Like, so that would make leave even more important because, all that extra stress from that. And for them to just be sent again and again and again back into war without being able to decompress, that got me really upset hearing that. Yeah, there was something else that you mentioned too that now I'm forgetting, but I just found at the end when the only time I really cried was when Chester Nez was talking about losing his legs for to diabetes. It just made me really sad, like it's such a terrible disease, and I pray that Indigenous people get better at combating that disease. So, and what else? There was something else. Oh my God, can't do two things at once. Um, yeah. Oh well, that's all I can think of at the moment. It was yeah, that's I too didn't think I would like the book being it's a war book and stuff. I was like, oh, I started it with thinking, oh, I'm gonna have to force myself to read this. But I actually was trying to force myself to slow down. I read it in like 2 days. So it was just like totally, totally readable and very enjoyable. Yeah, I thought it was a really good choice. And thank you so much. And I'm so sorry about Norton. Take
All right, so I guess we'll start at the top. Carol, Kat, Rosemary.
So Michelle, I'll just say that, what I learned so much from this book was about how unique the language is, and like he speaks of it being tonal, and there was so much to it, and how complicated this was. Are you all right, my dear? You're looking really sad right now. Are you okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I lost my
Okay.
dog, so
Uh,
maybe that was coming through. I don't know, but I
yeah,
was just listening
I
when,
heard that, but I
yeah,
just wanted to make sure you're okay there for a minute.
yeah,
So anyway, I did learn quite a bit about the language and how complicated it was and how hard they worked and how rigorous they were with it and how much they gave up to do it and how little acknowledgement they got even from the people they were working with, even when that was successful. That was hard to take. And so, I mean, I'm not through the entire book, but it's a real eye opener and just speaks to the things. I mean, and then the residential schools rears its ugly head again, and how he had to survive it, and like, but he did, and went on to help lots of people. And I think that we don't understand history as much. I think that's why we're in trouble now in the world, and we're headed for some really serious things, as we can see politically. But if we don't know the history, we can't change things. So anyway, that's my thought.
Thank you again for the opportunity to talk about this book, and have read it as well. What I noted throughout the book was the humility, as you mentioned, Michelle, how humble Chester was about all his accomplishments. And I couldn't help but think how triumphant he must have felt to speak and use his language to save people's lives after it's been, you know, beaten out of him at boarding school. Just like it was a big FU, basically, to the boarding school people, matrons. I really appreciated learning about Navajo culture and ceremony, and was glad that Chester had that opportunity to go to ceremony to heal after the war. One of the most impactful chapters was the livestock massacre. That was just horribly, horribly cruel of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The way they slaughtered these animals was just, I cannot imagine how his family and he dealt with that. And it also put in mind, of course, the buffalo slaughter, and also the sled dog slaughter for the Inuit people. So it's just, yeah, just complete cruelty that was so unnecessary. But Chester survived it. So I'm grateful for that, and to be able to read his experiences in the war. And yeah, we have to remind ourselves how effing terrible the war is, so we can stop doing it. But as Carol said, we haven't learned anything from history. So,
Well, and like we've been watching a whole genocide for a week or a year on our phones now, and it is shocking to me that it's hypocritical to me, that these folks are putting on their uniforms and saluting and voting in the very thing that we fought against in the wars. And I just, when you read this and you remember what they thought at that time, and how they thought they were doing the right thing, and how, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, so he felt very compelled to protect the land. It was really and then the opposite is happening today, where we're perfectly okay with the slaughter if they're Palestinian, if they're brown, if they're from Gaza, it's fine. So it's hard for me to read this when in a time where we were the so-called good guys, and only to see now that we've grown into the very thing we fought against in World War II. It baffles me that we don't see it. Just to add to what you're both saying, the slaughter of the sheep was so horrific, and we see that all the time by the governments trying to control the natives. And he actually said in the book, despite it being the dirty 30s and everybody being hungry, they could have used that meat. I think they would have had better peace with it if they would have killed them and used the meat to distribute to other people. Like, it, as wrong as it would be to apprehend the meat, even, but they still did it because they were awful human beings. There's no nice way to say it. And then to add to your point that he did that ceremony twice, and I wanted to bring that up, and I forgot, because the same thing happened with Indian residential school survivors here, that they had these horrible nightmares from what had happened to them, and they pushed it down, as best they could in some cases, and in other cases, succumbed to that. But as soon as people told their truth again, for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it resurfaced. Just like for him, when it became declassified information, all of those Japanese ghosts resurfaced. And so, like, I just think don't do the right, we don't have the right understanding. And when I talk about culturally appropriate services for Indigenous people, like he so eloquently showed it not once but twice through the book, how, yeah, I was in the mental institution along with all the other soldiers that came back, but he knew a lot of them weren't leaving that place, and he was. And when he got back home and he did ceremony, he was able to release a lot of that and heal properly. And so, we're going to have all these forced treatments and forced things here that will never have Indigenous culture to them. And the ones that do are run by pretend Indians. So we have a real issue here of understanding, like, but I know the goal's not healing. Like, I'm sure the US government said he lived as long as he did. I'm just as the Canadian government has said, I'm here talking to you today. So, it's just really important to remember, like, we are constantly being exterminated, yet our culture saves us time and time again. So, for those of us lucky enough to have it, unlike some of the residential school survivors that told their story and was unable to do ceremony and then they died prematurely, just really important to remind ourselves of all of that too. So thank you, Kat. Rosemary, would you like to speak about the book your way?
Sure. Kat warned me about the chapter on the slaughter of the livestock. So I made sure I didn't read it before I went to sleep, because it was absolutely horrific in terms of the cruelty involved, right, to the animals. And then totally disregarding what the sheep meant to the Navajo families, right? That for them, their wealth was in the number of sheep they had. And yes, there was overgrazing, but surely they could have come up with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the program FDR set up. There were other ways to deal with that, and they could have done that. And what also struck me about it, he talked about how afterwards, because there were Navajo who participated in the slaughter of the animals, that really broke down community feeling and spirit, and that there wasn't as much cooperation among people as there always had been. And so that takes the whole issue even deeper, right? In terms of what it means for the culture and people's relationships with each other. Again, I'm only about halfway through, and it's just that it's a way of life I've never heard described before, right? As a young boy growing up and herding the sheep and always, being on the move. And what's interesting is that by the time they are recruited into the Marines, that childhood experience, they were tough. They came out top on all these tests, whether it was physical, mental, whatever, for the Marines. And I think there's almost an element of shock or surprise that they should be doing so well, because we all have these images from war movies of big Marines, right? And that wasn't the case here. That's very much a different kind of strength that was brought to that work. And that scene near the beginning, the opening scene, landing at Guadalcanal, that was very emotional too, because it just brings to mind so many other wartime images of just, I don't know, the whole issue of war. That, there's something so wrong for all nations sending young men and women to fight these wars and who benefits, right? Um, anyway, that's all I want to say.
I'm really glad you did though. They were the best shots too. Of course they were. They're hunters. They've been hunting for thousands of years, right? So there were so many wonderful things that were kind of said about it. And really glad that it was brought up how incredibly strong they were to have survived all of those things. And straight out of boarding school too, right? So they went from really one military type environment to another military environment, and they actually said how the food was better at times. But I wanted to bring up something because you guys did talk about the horrible sheep burning policy they did. Um, I have found that throughout the entire book, he really illustrated how things smelt to him because he talked about the smell of certain things from the burning of the sheep to the um, puke smell in the ship going to the Pacific to, you know, the constant smell of decaying bodies while he was out there. And like he was really good at always giving out that description of the smell. And honestly, I have no idea how he has olfactory nerves at all now. I can't imagine after all of that. But then having those moments of like when they were given oils and stuff and lard and they could make their own fry bread and how they could smell it from like 3 miles away. They're like, I know that smell, and they would go find it and go have some. I was like he remembers those moments of joy, and I just love that he brought us along on such a great ride for this book. So yeah, and then I'm just gonna pause it for a moment. I always appreciate everybody sharing, and I know a lot of folks are really afraid of the, incoming administration, but I'll just try to remind you all to natives, this is a post-apocalyptic world we live in anyway. So for me, our way of life was ruined and stripped and governance taken. Like we've been here for thousands of years. And in the course of 150 years, we've literally lost all of our autonomy. So I have been struggling with a lot of the, after Trump election conversations, both in 2016 and that right now, only because at the end of the day, it's the first time somebody else's privilege is being threatened. But my privilege, like I've never had the luxury and privilege, like to this day, something happens to me, I will likely die by racist nurses and doctors, just determining I'm just another drunk Indian and not worthy of a stroke victim being helped, right? Like, because that racism is still so ugly today. So, from my point of view, like, I think it's great that people are now concerned and threatened, just like they were in 2016. But like, it is a reminder for us as Indigenous people, this is just another new settler government coming in. But and same with the upcoming Canadian one. Like, it. I understand why natives are mad at Justin Trudeau, but with the deepest respect, like settler narrative is just Russian talking points that settlers fall for because they're uneducated because we don't invest in our own education system, right? So anyway, yeah, I wanted to next focus on, I think, Wendy, if you'd like to unmute.
Thanks very much. I think yeah, this book I really, I was aware that um likely the some of the typing itself might have been Judith Shai-Savila's typing in words, but sure felt a lot like um Chester poured a lot of himself and his inner thoughts into what went into this book. Was very grateful for that. And I did feel just a lot of empathy for the human experience as he talked about things. Um, I think, as others have said, that it was hard for me to think about the time when he didn't get his leaves. He had spent so much time giving us the detail of what he was being asked to do on a daily basis. And then, um, you know, I think that's what made those times when it was rolling through that they were not getting a break. Um, it was interesting to me how quickly it was just kind of mentioned and moved on. I imagined that that's probably how he had experienced it as well, that it was mentioned and then he just kept moving on. And then I think the other part that others have also noted, really stuck with me, was the long years of time before this was talked about more openly. So I was really digesting like all of those inner pieces which they put into this book. Um, they were so inner for so long. Like it was just such a, and I kind of reflected on that a bit because I was like, how to be able to tell this story at this level of, I mean, it felt like it was written in a journal day by day, the way that it was laid out. And I was thinking, that ability to say all those things so many years later, I was thinking, there's a lot of that inner, it was still inside of him, even if he couldn't talk to people about it. And just really appreciated that. And then I think where it took me then next, because then I was thinking about, when it described him coming back and then getting on with life in other ways. And then I was thinking about how he knew that it was not something other people could know, but that he's going out in the world, like that part where he went, oh, I think I'm trying to find where it was. The one, uh, was he getting something about his license or something? He went to like a bureaucratic office somewhere. I'm looking, I have too many pages dog-eared, so I'm not finding it right away. But when he came back and was treated really dismissively, oh, page 217, um, when went to the federal building to get an ID card, and even though he was wearing his, spotless uniform, was, you're not a full citizen, and anyway, I won't go on with the parts of the horrible parts on how he was treated, but down at the bottom of that page, when he just said, I took a deep breath and told myself to stay calm, and this guy didn't know anything. Like I was just thinking about how many days and moments he probably had where he's telling himself those things. Um, anyway, that led me to ask questions about, it just gave me good pause on what I think about a lot, which is we know so little of another person's story. Like we interact with people day by day and we have no idea um, what's going on for them and just how important it is not to make assumptions. I think what I took from his story and what he talked about from his community and Navajo culture, um, it gave me a good appreciation in this book and many others on that worldview of like why those layers of community are important, because how do you get to a mindset where you are assuming the good in people? Well, you're needing to actually be reinforced on a regular basis what it means to think together with other people about going in a good direction. And we don't have a lot of opportunity right now um, in a white settler culture. You know, it leads me to reflect on where are the chances that I have to learn that within my own culture, where are the places where we do the opposite of that, and how do we do less of that? Because I think what we're talking about in a world sense on, these problems continue to happen, but every culture really needs those pieces of uplift in their worldview if they are going to make good decisions. Um, and so I thought a lot about that. And then I think the other thing, um, so he's talking at this very detailed level of what's going on inside. And it almost would allow me to forget like the long swaths of time when he wasn't actually in touch with his family. It would be like he would be talking about getting shipped out. And then he's like, oh, well, I guess I should write them a letter because they're going months, maybe years, just thinking that he's out, not headed into war, not headed into the military in this way. So it just really hit me that the way that he shared his experience left me feeling like even though he was away from his family for long swaths of time, that is not how he felt. Like it sounds like he felt he had ways of staying connected to that place, which I just think was something I really appreciate in what he shared in his story. And yeah, so I think I took a lot from this book. I think it left me with reflecting on veterans I've had in my own family and in my own life, and how I really didn't ask very good questions. Like when he described all the different services and recognitions that he would sit through and the things that were meaningful to him, how many Remembrance Day ceremonies have we watched where veterans are sitting there quietly? It just led me to think a lot more about what's going on in each of their minds and what are the moments in this moment of recognition that are meaningful to them and how limited I am in how much I know about that. So anyway, really appreciated this book, really was surprised how much it resonated for me. I was similar, I think, to what Kathy and others had said about I read it a lot faster than I thought because it was just a really um, well done book and really appreciated it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I've read a lot of World War II books. I have a lot of books from the Pacific battles. Specifically, they're like picture books and underwater, what the ships look like today. Because I was so deep into scuba diving, and my dad was a World War II buff, so he would always buy me these books, knowing I would dissect them and love them. And so, hearing and reading this and through that lens now of anti-racism, if I were to go back through them and be like, you know, did anybody ever mention the Navajo code talkers? Did anybody? And just seeing, because like he was very descriptive about a lot of the ships that went down, and so I was wanted to cross-reference it to some of my books, but when Norton passed it, it just I didn't have the time to do the really deep nerdy thing I wanted to do. Kind of back to what you were talking about when he came back to the States and he had that person of power. I wish I could emphasize to you folks, I experience that every day, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a nurse, whether it's a secretary, how rude, condescending, and dismissive the average person I meet in a day is. Like that that happened to him. I bet you three when I walk outside these doors, three things a day happen easy, which is why I don't like leaving the house. Um, like I don't know a native that doesn't experience those levels of racism a day. Like if you have to walk out in the world, you're getting that type of behavior every single day. And so, um, and I can't emphasize it enough. Like I can't open up my Facebook and read about the passing of Murray Sinclair without reading horrendous comments, even though I have like tens of thousands of people blocked. I still see them with no one saying, "Hey, is that racist?" or "I'm going to report you for racism." No, no, no. I'm going to wear a blue bracelet. That'll help. It's not helping. That is the level of discourse. Like we're so on the other ends of understanding each other. And I'm sure if Black people were in this book club right now, they would say the same thing. Like the level of hate and racism they get from everyday folks. Like it's 24/7. It never ends. It never stops. And that's why Like leaving the property is something I dread doing. And I used to love doing it. As you all know, I was like had political events and events with other speakers, whatever. I can't do it anymore. And the reason is because I've filled my cup too much. It's overflowing with too much racism. And I'm glad that he just takes a deep breath, tells himself to stay calm, just as my mom did, just as my granny had to, just as my great grandparents had to. But I don't have it in me anymore. And then when I say, hey, that was wrong, 3 years of committee work in order to get yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to reach that. Meanwhile, I have suffered how much hate while non-Indigenous get to not only not experience, not internalize it, not have to heal from it, but have debates and committees over how we're going to deal with it. 500 emails later, nothing resolved, but I've wasted my time reading these emails, wasted my time and having hopes in people, taking this person aside and telling them what they said was wrong. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that Marie Sinclair dies and people are not reporting these horrendous comments, right? Like it is every day. What he described right there, I'll bet you Kathy has like 5 things that happened today, 4 things from yesterday, the day before. This is why my husband told me to start the podcast. Like, you just got to start telling this stuff. And some people legitimately understand the gravity of it. And I get great messages from some folks. But other people, like, you tell them these stories over and over again, and they still don't get it. And I can't understand. I can't understand how you read the TRC, and not understand these, like, how horrific the violence against women is. Like there's such a disconnect, I feel like, with regular Canadians and myself, and even people that supposedly in my inner circle. I've had to really push a lot of settlers out of it because they're just draining and draining. When I got shit to, I got to get ready for Richard Van Camp. I got books to read. I got podcasts to do. I just don't need to deal with fragility of settlers, right? And he had to. He was doing it until the day he died. And I just get so frustrated how it is that people can't see the racism. We'll be the first to go to a Gaza rally and be like, oh my God, colonialism is wrong, while they exclude Indigenous people at their own fucking rally. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Nothing makes sense to me anymore. And so I've really had to distance myself because I know, the infighting in settlers is strong right now. And so, like, ridiculous to someone like me, to all the Black people, especially in the States. Like, I don't even know. Like, it's like watching 2 5-year-olds having a fist fight in a schoolyard when it's like you, they hold so much power over all of these people. And that happens in every government setting. That's why all of the TRC has, like, mandatory anti-racism training for every public servant. So fuckers like him can't get away. But I have yet to see a single policy ever created that's like, yes, that was racist. You're fired. The opposite. We always get the shit end of the stick. So we have to smile and nod and mask. In my case, understanding now that I've been masking for 47 years. And I'm tired of it. And that's the gravity of the podcast. It's the gravity of this book club, is that we need settlers to see how bad the racism is in 2024, let alone when he was going through it in the 60s or, the 40s, whatever time frame it hasn't ended, because that white superiority is just embedded in everything. And how white people can't see it, I just don't get it. And then I do think it's kind of funny. A lot of people of color, especially on TikTok, is making fun of the other people of color who are like, yeah, pro-Trump. And with one person, she even made like a ukulele song of, like, the leopards will eat your face, because, like, Latinas who voted for Trump are now getting shipped out of the country. They're like, how did this happen? Meanwhile, the rest of us, people of color, are laughing at them, right? So and women are losing their rights and they're happy to do it apparently. Like it's so incredible to me. I can't even. So I just wanted to ask you folks, did you want to watch that 15-minute documentary? Okay. So Zoom has updated a lot of their features. So I'm hoping I'll be able to share my screen. Share screen options. Multiple can share. Usually there's a setting for sound so that when I share, it says yes. So I'm just going to try one more time. Share. There's a different button. Okay. Layout options, share sound. There we go. All right. There and share. Okay. I hope you can all hear this really good. And I'm going to put the closed captionings on. I'm going to hit play.
If we can just finish up with you reintroducing yourself again, where you state your name, and if you'd like to say a few quick words.
I'm Charles Checker Tompkins. I'm a Métis. I'm half English and Cree-Indian. I love my country and I done everything they asked me to do. And that's why I was in the Army. Tani kuti kapisian. Jika suskat noh timan to nigo kaskihtaman. Muikki, tuo muuten kapitohtan. Samsta mam turnitsi kandayan udi kapitohtian. Kapiawasiu yahkayas. Samsta mam turnitsi kan. Suskat noh timan to nigo kaya saan sigis na bahutta. San nitsa nakiwa kakio kistami nakakio na matito. Nuichiwa ka nagkakio. Mau yaki konstui mau. Charles managi sikatun stis. Maya nickname managi miya. Chiksis managi sikat. Kakaya ko ta kakaya uta uksumanagi sikata chiksis. Checker one me week. Checker Tompkins. Good chiksis.
His name was Charles Marvin Tompkins, but we called him Checker, and I am not sure why they called him Checker. But every one in my family had some sort of a nickname. He got married, I think, about 1939 or 1940. And shortly after that, he joined the military.
I think during the war, every kid wanted to join the army. Every kid. You know, you get 3 squares a day, you know. There was no work or nothing. And but of course, us young fellas, you just couldn't wait to get in, really.
I think a lot of our brothers and sisters who went overseas learned a different lifestyle. For the first time, people felt concrete under their feet. For the first time, they saw buildings 5 and 10 stories high.
We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
And it read that all personnel who could speak an Indian language report to such and such a hangar on such and such a day. Checker reported. He said there was about 600 Aboriginal people in there. They were broken up into small groups, into the language groups, and given messages to translate back and forth. The Cree came on top.
They had a way of expressing every different type of aircraft that they had. Sagamis Kapaksigi, that's a mosquito bomber. Sagamis is a mosquito, and bomber is an explosion in Cree. Kapaksigi. They were attached to the American Air Force, and they would talk to one another and translate how many aircraft was going at a certain time, what type of aircraft, bombers they had, how many would be going. They'd say this in Cree on the radio, and the other fellow at the other end would be interpreting whatever message was sent.
I don't think the Germans had a bloody clue on what the hell was being said. Some foreign code that no one heard of.
Napicho, agam nagdawit na makandaw paksigiig. Guanista nun yan sa gamisak. Guanoy mas nahino ta. Agam nagsasaman dawit na makandaw paksigiig. Since Americans couldn't understand what they were saying, they were just translating messages. Finally, they just said, the hell with it, we'll use their own Indians. So then our guys ended up at the front lines.
He didn't like the war because of this destruction he saw and the action that he was in. I told Checker, it's about time our knee stows are getting some credit for what they did. And that's when he told me that he was a code talker during the war. I asked him why he hadn't told me earlier. He said, I was sworn to secrecy. And that's why he never said a word.
We don't dial 911, my favorite ever part of this.
Holy smokes, Frank. Remember these? That's the kind of pictures they used to take when we were junior NCO school.
It's great.
That was in the wintertime, eh? The checker's right there.
Yeah.
He looks serious. He was never serious in the military.
He always looks serious in the picture, yeah.
This must have been their very first day in uniform. They both look like hell.
Always was, yeah.
Peter and Checker.
You know, he couldn't have had that uniform probably the first time he put it on.
He's trying to look taller than he
Yeah.
should be. You know, that's a good picture of
Oh,
Checker.
God, I'd say, yeah.
He looks serious as hell.
And Checker.
Really brings back lots of memories. Lots of good memories.
That's really good.
He didn't want to lead the parade. He just wanted the parade to be a parade. And he could have watched it from the side. He was a great man. Gave his heart.
Although he'd done the job with three Indians, that fact doesn't matter. I done what I was asked, and that's good enough. If you listen to me, I'm sorry I'm taking up your time. This is goodbye, I guess.
There's quite a few, like if you were to kind of search, there's one from the National Geographic that's 15 minutes. There's a few on the Navajo code talkers, and he mentioned it in his book. He was like interviewed quite a few times by different folks. So I thought maybe if you did want to learn more, obviously there's tons of resources. So stop share. That's what I meant to do. Not very good with the new way Zoom is set up on me yet. So yeah, and so not tomorrow, but the next Tuesday, if you're interested in an evening with Richard Van Camp, they're free tickets to the library. They start at 6 p.m. And then next week, or next month, sorry, we have these reflections on allyship by Andrea Menard. And like it's the super smallest book, like it's only 45 pages long. So it's not going to be much of a read, but we'll launch the next year's books, and we'll probably start in January with that new report that came out about the missing graves. I think that's really important that we all dissect it. So that'll probably be January. As much as I want to like read Marie Sinclair's or Jody Wilson Rainbow's book, she is coming up, by the way, for folks who didn't get a ticket. It's WordFest, coming here to launch her newest book. So yeah, just some things there. I bought some cute books I'll share with you. My podcast that came out today talked about There's an Anuk. He's quite the little superstar on TikTok. And he put out a book about his A Guide to Sobriety, 10 Gentle Reminders. And it's so funny because like this book was obviously written, by folks who lived in the 40s and 60s and and then the newest generation having this book. And I think about like the books from WWII and how they were written by older men from older times in the 80s. And this is like, it is really like our youth are so passionate and empathetic and kind, and it oozes through this self-published book. So I haven't read it yet, but I did read this because it's cute and quick. It's called Sharing the Land. We Call Home by Henry Giroux. She works at the Calgary Public Library, and she self-published this really adorable book. It's called, or at the back it says, "Come learn about Treaty 7 and the land acknowledgements from the eyes of a visitor as a friendship blooms." And it's about cute kids like just coming to Calgary. So I just brought it up because she's been here in Calgary for decades at this point. Just a lovely human being. I also bought The Res Doctor from Gets Crazy Boy. I loved his first book about the stars, and this is a graphic novel, so I might give a review for that as well. So yeah, I have a few books. I got lots of books at WordFest from one of my favorite horror artists. I met him. I can't believe it. He's an American that came to WordFest, and I never thought I'd meet him, let alone like get a picture or something with him. So, and so Marie Sinclair's son, he also came, and I picked up his Winnipeg book, but I also had him sign Murray's book, and all the authors that were on this panel discussion signed it like, "Hey, we were here too." It was really funny and a lot of fun. So have a lot of good things to say and lots of new books to put into the book club. I'm actually thinking I'm going to have to like just set new goals for the year in order to get through all of these books. So yeah, but I think January will be us going through that book, that report about the missing children and unmarked buried. It's like volume 4 of the TRC, but it's about missing children, as well as the unmarked graves and the woman who had done her work to kind of go through some of the places that she was at. She put out a report about it. It wasn't like kind of like the TRC only had a small amount of money and funding and ability time frame to do the work they did. Kind of the same thing in her position. I think she's that person that would have loved to had longer to do it. But anyway, I'm sure the report will really talk about that. But one of the things that I've been reading about the report that I think is so important to acknowledge is that Canada can't investigate itself. And apparently that's a strong theme throughout this report because of, the atrocities. Like that, just that one example of that, bureaucrat that was like, you're not even a full citizen yet, Native. That's the type of thing that we experience, whether it doesn't matter what department in Canada it is. So of course they're not going to properly investigate themselves, right? So the hope is that by putting that out there, we'll get some new tools, some new tricks to consider talking about these issues about, and hopefully educating others. And actually, I can't emphasize this enough. I was really disappointed with how many people didn't know who Marie Sinclair was. So, like, there's Indigenous 101, and then there's like, I don't know, like play school Indigenous to get out to people. They don't even know who Marie Sinclair was or the gravity of his work over the course of his life. So I just really encourage anyone listening to the podcast, any of the folks that are in this room, please share what you learned tonight, share what you learned in the book, write a good, honest review somewhere, because people don't know. They just don't know. So yeah, thank you all for coming tonight.